There's a sacred secret about spiritual depth that nobody warns you about. The deeper you go with God, the fewer people can follow you there. And right now, if you're watching this, you might be discovering that your spiritual calling isn't just changing your relationship with heaven, it's completely restructuring every human connection you have. There's a reason you hear things others don't hear and sense things others don't sense. You're not imagining it, you're not going crazy, and you're definitely not alone. What you're experiencing is the activation of dormant spiritual capacities that only emerge when human voices fade away. Heaven has been developing abilities in you that cannot manifest in crowds, cannot grow in committees, and cannot mature in conventional ministry. You're about to discover why your most powerful moments happen when you're completely alone, why your clearest revelations come at 3 a.m., and why you understand things you've never studied. This will explain the dreams that feel more real than reality, the knowing without learning, and the supernatural encounters you can't share with anyone. If you've been hiding these experiences, afraid of being labeled extreme or delusional, prepare to understand exactly what's happening to you. What I'm about to share will explain why you feel like you're speaking a different language than everyone around you, why family gatherings feel hollow, why church services sometimes leave you more empty than full. This isn't about pride or superiority. This is about a divine process that every person marked for deep spiritual purpose must navigate. The wilderness isn't just a place, it's a spiritual dimension where God forms his vessels. Think about Moses, 40 years in Midian before his calling manifested. Elijah fed by ravens at the brook Cherith, John the Baptist growing up in the desert, Paul disappearing into Arabia for 3 years after his conversion. Every major spiritual leader the Bible presents to us went through extended seasons where human company became scarce and divine presence became everything. But here's what religion won't tell you. This isolation isn't punishment, it's preparation. The first reality we must confront is that spiritual depth creates frequency shifts. When your spirit begins vibrating at heaven's frequency, you literally become incompatible with certain conversations, environments, and relationships. It's like trying to tune into AM radio when you're broadcasting on satellite. The wavelengths simply don't match anymore. You sit at dinner tables where people discuss sports, politics, and vacation plans, while your spirit is processing revelations about eternity. You attend meetings where everyone's worried about quarterly profits while you're sensing spiritual shifts in the atmosphere. This isn't judgment, it's simply dimensional difference. I remember receiving a profound vision about the nature of prayer during a corporate lunch meeting. As my colleagues debated marketing strategies, tears were streaming down my face because God was showing me intercession patterns that could shift nations. How do you explain that? How do you bridge that gap? You don't. You learn to hold the sacred privately. The second reality, God intentionally creates these isolation chambers. In Hosea 2:14, the Lord says, "Therefore I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her." Notice the sequence: allurement, then wilderness, then intimate conversation. The isolation isn't accidental, it's orchestrated. Why would a loving God isolate his beloved? Because certain truths can only be transmitted in solitude. Certain anointings can only be received when every other voice goes silent. Certain authority can only be established when you learn to stand alone with heaven's verdict, regardless of earth's opinion. Consider the prophet Jeremiah. God told him explicitly not to marry, not to enter houses of feasting, not to participate in community mourning rituals. His very calling demanded social separation. Was this cruelty? No, it was necessity. His message required a lifestyle that demonstrated complete dependence on divine truth rather than human comfort. The third reality involves the burden of seeing. When spiritual sight opens, you begin perceiving things others cannot see. You sense deception where others see success. You feel storms coming while everyone else plans picnics. You recognize spiritual assignments in people who think they're just living normal lives. This seeing creates an almost unbearable tension. Do you speak what you see and risk being labeled fanatic? Do you stay silent and carry the weight alone? Most who walk this path learn the discipline of selective revelation, sharing only what people have grace to receive, carrying the rest in intercession. A pastor once asked me why I looked troubled during what seemed like a powerful worship service. How could I explain that I saw spiritual cobwebs covering half the congregation? That I watched angels leaving through the windows because the presence had been replaced with performance? These are burdens that create isolation, not by choice, but by necessity. The fourth reality, your transformation threatens others' comfort. When you begin walking in unusual spiritual authority, it confronts every comfortable religious system around you. Your freedom exposes others' bondage. Your faith highlights others' fear. Your peace in storms makes others question their panic. This isn't intentional on your part. You're not trying to make anyone uncomfortable, but light does what light does. it reveals. And most people prefer the familiar darkness to the discomfort of exposure. So they'll distance themselves, not because they hate you, but because your presence requires them to make choices they're not ready to make. I've watched this pattern repeatedly. Someone encounters God genuinely, begins walking in authentic power, and suddenly their religious community becomes their greatest opposition. The very people who taught them about God become obstacles to their deeper journey with God. The isolation isn't just social, it's systemic. The fifth reality involves the languages of depth. As you progress spiritually, you begin operating in frequencies of communication that transcend words. You understand things through spiritual perception rather than verbal explanation. You receive downloads that would take hours to articulate. You carry revelations that human vocabulary cannot contain. Try explaining to someone that you spent 3 hours weeping because God showed you the sound frequencies of worship that heal cellular trauma. Try describing how you saw the mathematical patterns of grace in a vision. Try articulating why you know something is about to happen without any natural evidence. These experiences create a communication gap that breeds isolation. But here's the divine paradox. This isolation is actually integration. While you're being separated from shallow connections, you're being integrated into heaven's community. While human voices grow distant, angelic conversations become clearer. While earthly fellowship decreases, celestial partnership increases. The prophet Daniel experienced this perfectly. In Daniel chapter 10, he received a vision that left him without strength, alone by the river. His companions fled in terror, though they saw nothing. But in that moment of complete human isolation, an angel touched him and said, "You are greatly beloved." Heaven's embrace came precisely when earth's support disappeared. The sixth reality is that isolation becomes your incubation chamber for divine authority. Every moment you stand alone with truth while the crowd chooses comfort, spiritual muscle develops. Every night you wrestle with revelations too heavy for human shoulders, your capacity for carrying glory expands. This isn't suffering, it's strengthening. Watch what happened with Joseph. 13 years between his dreams and their fulfillment. 13 years of isolation from family, false accusation, prison walls, forgotten promises. But in that isolation, something was being forged. The 17-year-old who couldn't keep his mouth shut about his dreams became the 30-year-old who could administrate revelation that would save nations. The isolation didn't break him. It built him. The pit taught him perspective. The prison taught him patience. The palace taught him purpose. But notice, each level of isolation corresponded with a deeper level of divine download. His dreams in his father's house were personal. His interpretations in prison were powerful. His revelations in Pharaoh's court were planetary. This is the seventh reality. Spiritual authority requires authentication through aloneness. You cannot lead others through territories you haven't navigated solo. You cannot break chains you haven't wrestled with in secret. You cannot declare victory over battles you haven't fought in isolation. Consider Gideon hiding in the winepress, threshing wheat alone, terrified and confused. The angel appears and calls him mighty warrior. Why? Because heaven saw what that isolation was producing. A deliverer who learned dependence before he learned dominance. His weakness in hiding became his strength in warfare. The modern church wants microwave ministers, quick training, fast promotion, immediate platform. But heaven operates in slow cooker seasons. The greater your assignment, the longer your isolation. The higher your calling, the deeper your valley training. This isn't delay, it's development. I've discovered that every level of spiritual influence requires a corresponding death to human approval. Want to heal the sick? Die to the need for medical validation. Want to prophesy accurately? Die to the need for peer acceptance. Want to move in signs and wonders? Die to the need for theological endorsement. Each death happens in isolation, where only God's opinion matters. The eighth reality involves the reconstruction of your identity matrix. In isolation, God dismantles who you thought you were to reveal who you actually are. Every label society gave you, every limitation family spoke over you, every lie the enemy planted in you, all must be excavated and replaced with heaven's perspective. This process is brutal because it's thorough. God doesn't just want to use you, He wants to transform you. And transformation requires demolition before reconstruction. In isolation, there's nowhere to hide from this process. No distractions to delay it, no relationships to cushion it. Just you, God, and the truth about both. Remember when Peter walked on water? The disciples stayed in the boat, but Peter stepped into isolation, just him and Jesus on the waves. In that moment, separated from groupthink, separated from collective fear, he discovered capabilities he never knew existed. Yes, he faltered, but he walked on water. The others stayed dry and safe and powerless. The ninth reality, isolation, teaches you the difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is the human emotion of disconnection. Aloneness is the spiritual position of consecration. Loneliness seeks comfort. Aloneness seeks communion. Loneliness breeds self-pity. Aloneness breeds self-discovery. Jesus modeled this perfectly. Luke records multiple instances where Christ withdrew to lonely places to pray, not because he was antisocial, but because he understood that certain dimensions of power require solitary pursuit. The same Jesus who fed 5,000 knew when to dismiss the multitude and ascend the mountain alone. Here's what religion won't teach you. The prayers that shift atmospheres aren't prayed in prayer meetings, they're prayed in closets. The revelations that transform generations aren't received in conferences, they're received in caves. The authority that makes demons tremble isn't gained through ordination, it's gained through isolation. The 10th reality involves the phenomenon of accelerated growth through decreased distraction. In isolation, 1 year can accomplish what 10 years of normal religious activity cannot. Why? Because every moment becomes intentional, every thought becomes examined, every emotion becomes processed, every revelation becomes integrated. It's like being in a hyperbaric chamber. The pressure is intense, but the healing is accelerated. The isolation creates conditions where spiritual development happens at supernatural speed. Gifts that normally take decades to mature can manifest in months. Understanding that requires years of study can download in moments. I knew someone who spent 6 months in complete isolation after a devastating betrayal. No church, no Christian friends, no ministry activities, just them and God in a tiny apartment. They emerged speaking in tongues they'd never learned, seeing visions they'd never sought, carrying authority they'd never pursued. The isolation became their seminary, their ordination, their commissioning. The 11th reality, your isolation is creating a reservoir of revelation. Every tear you cry alone waters future harvests. Every question you wrestle with privately becomes answers for public ministry. Every battle you fight in secret becomes victory for others to inherit. Think about King David in the caves of Adullam, isolated, rejected, running for his life. But in those caves, he wrote psalms that would heal broken hearts for 3,000 years. His isolation became humanity's inheritance. His private pain became public prescription. His wilderness wanderings became our worship manual. This is the divine economy. Nothing is wasted. That rejection that drove you into isolation, it's developing resilience others will need. That betrayal that left you friendless, it's building discernment that will protect many. That misunderstanding that separated you from community, it's creating clarity that will guide generations. The 12th reality involves the establishment of your spiritual sovereignty. In isolation, you learn to rule your internal kingdom before you're given external influence. You master your thoughts before you're trusted with others' minds. You govern your emotions before you're granted governmental authority. This is why isolation feels like death, because it is. It's the death of codependency, the death of people-pleasing, the death of external validation, the death of borrowed convictions, and from these deaths, resurrection power emerges. The prophet Ezekiel experienced this profoundly. God told him to lie on his left side for 390 days, then his right side for 40 days. Isolated, restricted, performing prophetic acts nobody understood. But in that isolation, he was becoming a living oracle, a human symbol, a prophetic weapon. His isolation wasn't limiting him, it was loading him. Here's the transformative truth. Isolation isn't removing you from purpose, it's preparing you for impact. Every relationship that falls away creates space for divine assignment. Every door that closes pushes you toward your destiny door. Every voice that goes silent amplifies heaven's frequency. The caterpillar doesn't enter the cocoon because it failed as a caterpillar. It enters because it succeeded so thoroughly that transformation becomes inevitable. Your isolation isn't punishment for failure, it's promotion to transformation. The very fact that you're experiencing this depth of aloneness indicates the height of calling being prepared. But understand this, not everyone can handle this process. Many abort their isolation prematurely, rushing back to shallow community rather than completing deep transformation. They choose the comfort of crowds over the crucible of calling. They settle for religious activity over spiritual authority.